Okay, what we're going to look at today is how you can use the structural drawing tool plugins to control the orientation of your structural elements in your model. Typically by default, most elements have their local axes with the z-axis oriented in the vertical direction, but for vertical or column elements, this is generally a predetermined direction for the analysis program. So if we have a zero orientation angle for our structural sections, if we look at the graphic visualization of these vertical elements or columns, what you'll see is that the web is aligned in the global y direction for all of these vertical elements if no orientation angle is specified. Now what instead we might like to do is have each of these columns aligned with the underlying ellipse that sets out these structural elements. So, but rather than calculate the orientation angle at each position around the ellipse, what we can do is we can use the structural drawing tool plugin to calculate any arbitrary alignment based on a surface within that document. So here, if I bring in the structural analysis model, again what you'll see is that the webs of all the column elements align with the global y-axis in the model. Then in the structural drawing Rhino plugin dialog, you'll see there's an orient tab which we can use to control or calculate the orientation angle for an element based on the position at the midpoint of the centerline representation and a surface which defines effectively a normal or a local axis orientation. So here if I select the structural element centerlines and then pick the ellipse to calculate the orientation of the elements, if we zoom in, all the webs are now aligned with the surface, or the local y-axis perpendicular to the web is oriented with the normal of the surface at the midpoint of each element. We can then extract out the structural data for that particular model and then overwrite the existing model, and what you'll see is that the beam elements will now have an orientation angle specified rather than being 0. So if I overwrite the existing data, now you'll see instead of being 0, the plugin's calculated the orientation angle to achieve the orientation we're after. And then if I view that in the graphical representation, then instead of all the webs being vertical or aligned with the global y, they're actually wrapped around the ellipse as the structure exists. So then you can do the proper structural assessment based on the actual alignment required. Now, that works then if you're wanting to align it with the surface normal at that particular point. If we there's two ways this works, and you'll notice when you specify the surface alignment, you can specify tolerance for what basically calculates a point on the surface or not. Now, if the distance from the midpoint to the surface is greater than the tolerance, then what it will do is will orient that axis towards the local, to the nearest point on the surface instead of by the surface normal. Now that's perhaps not so evident here on this particular direction. We can actually change the axis so that it orients on the z-axis instead. Run the command again, and now all the webs should be pointing towards the closest point on the ellipse. And again then we can extract out the structural data and update our structural analysis model and carry on with the orientation that we've desired from that setup. So this will work at the moment for SAP, GSA, and Sophistic, and the other programs will be coming very shortly. So try it for yourself. It will work very good for any arbitrary grid alignment where you'll wish to orient the section axes to a particular alignment on an underlining surface.